This is such an iconic song, and we're all going to, I think, enjoy very much listening to Professor Dominic Broomfield-McHugh and Luke Bayer.
Thank you so much. In this series, I'm looking at showstoppers and trying to kind of theorize the idea of stopping the show with a show tune. And in the first lecture in the series, I looked at Sondheim's Send in the Clowns, a song that was written for someone that could barely sing, but was a great actress and a great character. And so we looked at how a songwriter could manage that situation. And in the next lecture, we're going to look at You'll Never Walk Alone, which is kind of the opposite kind of song because it was written for an opera singer in the original production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel in 1945. But today I'm thinking about voice in a slightly different way as it relates to representation, i.e. how a showstopper can give voice to a particular community. And I should say from the outset that this isn't supposed to be a kind of response to what's going on in the world right now. This was planned a long time ago, but it is worth thinking about what is it about this word that seems so personal. And so I started looking up definitions of the word representation historically, and the Oxford English Dictionary tells us that back in 1370 it was the act of evoking the thought or idea of someone, and then later on it's an image which stands for a person, and then in the 16th century we find examples of it playing the part of or imitating someone. And all of these kinds of words and phrases are incredibly personal, and I guess whoever we are, we usually care to some extent what images and ideas are connected with us. We could also think about it as meaning to present again a more intense version of ourselves. So if we think about representation as maybe an image which stands for a person, we also start to think about how there's a danger of stereotyping. Because if you've only got one image to represent a person, an idea, then it's necessary to essentialize, to focus on just one or two aspects of them. And that's especially complicated when the image or the song or the poem stands for a group, because then you get more general still. And then when the group is stigmatized or marginalized, then those sorts of ideas start to come into the mix. And when the group isn't part of creating the image, then there's always a danger that the artist, whether they're a songwriter or a painter, is going to project stereotypes that they have in their mind that are already out there in society into the work of art. And when it comes to human sexuality, I don't know why I looked at you, Luke, like that. When it comes to human sexuality, this is particularly complicated because sexuality involves both feelings and behaviors, and so trying to grapple with someone else's feelings and behaviors becomes really tricky. And so I thought we'd look at an example from the musical theatre literature, Cole Porter. This is someone whose sexuality has dominated the reception of his work, and this is the songwriter of musicals like Anything Goes and Kiss Me Kate. And a few years ago, I worked with a friend on an edition of The Letters of Cole Porter, still available from all good retailers. And when we were doing this work, we were delighted to find a stash of letters from Porter written in 1925 to the Russian ballet dancer Boris Kochno. And at this point, Kochno was about 23, 24, and Porter was 10 years older than that. And the letters are written in French. Not brilliant French, actually, with the occasional English word like good night thrown in there. But they reveal the very intense feelings that Porter had about this man who was a major ballet dancer with the Ballet Russe and was also briefly a lover of Diaghilev, who commissioned The Rite of Spring. So it's a kind of interesting cultural landscape that Porter was flinging himself into. And Porter and Kochno were both traveling around Italy at the time, separately. And occasionally they would meet up and have sex. And the letters reveal the problems of trying to carry on this kind of relationship in the age before text messaging, because they had to send letters to each other to say, this is where I'm going to be on these dates. And Porter gets very whiny in some of these letters, going, where are you? And he arrives in some Italian town and goes, I went to look for a letter at the post office, but there was nothing. And then he carries on. Fortunately, I've arranged to be in Florence on the following days, and I'm sure it'll be difficult to meet. But in any case, I will have the great luxury to look at those beautiful eyes of which I dream, night and day, my Boris. Good night, and don't forget for an instant that I love you. It's very tender, and those of you that know the Cole Porter literature will be familiar with the phrase night and day from a song that he wrote many years later. 4 days on from this, Porter is now in Florence and not very happy not to have found a letter from Boris, and starts becoming quite demanding in this letter and says, I'm so hungry that you tell me you love me, and thousands of times, so that I can read the words you've written during the night when I suffer to have your lips against mine, your lips that I've kissed so often and so tenderly, my Boris. Now, it's been known for quite a long time that Porter was sexually attracted to men, and so by the end of the 20th century, people were writing biographies very much focusing on this aspect of his life. And this is one of my favorite examples. It's called Genius and Lust. And it's a dual biography of Porter with his English counterpart and contemporary, Noel Coward. And I couldn't resist quoting the blurb for this book because it's so over the top. They were famous and rich. They set fashion and the rules of sophisticated love, and they did all this for over half a century while keeping their homosexuality a secret. Although their astonishing output was deeply influenced by their sexuality, they feared exposure and went to tragic lengths to hide their true identities, which I'm sure, to be fair, was sometimes true. But we can see this fixation on this one aspect of them and this combining of Porter with Coward. 25 years on from that, this sort of idea has turned into an even more reductive version of Porter in the Netflix series Hollywood, where we see Cole Porter represented by an actor waiting in a gas station to receive sexual services from one of the men that works there. He doesn't really have anything else to do in the whole thing, but that is then the image of Cole Porter. What then should we make of the 1946 film Night and Day, in which Porter is depicted as being happily married to a woman, Linda Lee Thomas, played by Alexis Smith opposite Cary Grant as Cole Porter? Well, in real life, Cole Porter in 1918 met this woman, Linda Lee Thomas, who was a rich divorcee, and appears to have fallen in love with her. And usually the biographies just imply that there was nothing much between them, that it was just a marriage of convenience. But if we go back to the letters and the time when Cole Porter met this woman, so the beginning of 1918, Porter writes to Monty Woolley, another theatrical figure and a gay man. And his correspondence with Woolley is very personal and open. And he says, I lunch and dine with Linda Thomas every day, and between times call her up on the telephone. She happens to be the most perfect woman in the world, and I'm falling so in love with her that I'm attractively triste. It may be merely the spring, but it looks dangerously like the real thing, and I'm quite terrified, for there's nothing like it to kill concentration. We never hear about this strand of Porter's relationship with his wife, and so it seems to me that there's quite a journey from 1918, when this is what Porter was confiding to one of his friends about his feelings, through to 2020, when he becomes that figure of fun in a gas station. In 1946, the same year that the de-queered Cole Porter appeared as a happily married man in Night and Day, Porter's contemporary Irving Berlin wrote his biggest hit, Annie Get Your Gun, for the great Broadway diva Ethel Merman. And there's an example of a song in this show that shows how, even though in 1946 you couldn't depict gay relationships or queer relationships openly on the screen, and certainly not in a celebratory way, there are ways for us to reclaim some of this literature for our own feelings and selves without changing a word. So we're going to show you now how this works. And we're going to look at a song that's called I Got Lost in His Arms. Please welcome back Luke Bayer.
Don't ask me just how it happened. I wish I knew. I can't believe that it's happened, and still it's true. I got lost in his arms, and I had to stay. It was dark in his arms, and I lost my way. From the dark came a voice, and it seemed to say, there you go, there you go. How I felt as I fell, I just can't recall. But his arms held me fast, and it broke the fall. And I said to my heart, as it foolishly kept jumping all around, I got lost, but look what I found. I said to my heart, as it foolishly kept jumping all around, I got lost, but look what I found.
This is a lovely song. There we go. And of particular note is that last line where Berlin writes, I got lost, but look what I found, which we'll come back to a bit later. Now, Jerry Herman, who wrote the song I Am What I Am, is best known for writing the musical Hello, Dolly in 1964. This was the big hit of the 1960s. And he wrote Hello, Dolly with Ethel Merman in mind, although she only agreed to appear in it in the last 3 months of the show after it had become a big hit. But he went to see her in Annie Get Your Gun as a teenager and said, it changed my life. In the 1970s, his career was in the doldrums. He'd had 3 flops in a row. But he went to see the French art house film La Cage aux Folles about a same-sex couple and their shenanigans with their son. And his immediate reaction to it was, that's a Jerry Herman musical. So he had this instinctive response to it, but he had a problem in that he found that someone already had the rights and other people were already working on it. And it took several years. It was 1982 when finally he was then offered the chance to do his version of it. And so they had to gather a new team. And the guy that was hired to write the script, Harvey Fierstein, was the young one of the group, and he was best known at this time for writing a play called Torch Song Trilogy, which he also appeared in on Broadway. This was an iconic major appearance. And it was actually revived here in London about 13 years ago with Sarah Kesselman and David Bedella, who, funnily enough, have appeared in previous Gresham lectures that I've given. And then completing the team was Arthur Lawrence, the man who wrote the scripts for West Side Story and Gypsy. And he was also a major screenwriter, including in 1948 of Alfred Hitchcock's first colour film, Rope, which is inspired by the Leopold and Loeb case where 2 gay students, decided to kill another student to prove their superiority. And Hitchcock, who was well known to be a very naughty person, was aware that Lawrence was having a relationship with Farley Granger, who you can see there on the left, at the time that they were working on the film. So there was this frisson going on behind the scenes and this autobiographical element. And it's interesting that Lawrence had done this work on this very queer text where they aren't referred to as gay in the film, but it is implied that they have this particular relationship. And so it made him particularly well qualified to work on La Cage. So you have this collaboration, and all three of them in their autobiographies talk about what a happy and positive process it was for them. So, for example, Firestein says, "We came from different eras, but were united in our aim to see a Broadway audience cheer a man declaring undying ardor to his same-sex partner." And Arthur Lawrence's diaries or date books are at the Library of Congress. I went to look at them last year, and you can see that they met regularly, the three of them, through the second half of 1982 into 1983, and they always met at Jerry Herman's house. Jerry Herman's other career was as an interior decorator. He would move into houses, renovate them, and sell them on for a huge profit. And my understanding is that that's actually the reason he became quite so wealthy. So we can see them meeting in November on the 17th and on the 18th. At 11, they meet at Jerry's with Alan Carr, who was the producer. And then into 1983, they meet for 4 hours at Jerry's. In January the 27th, they meet with Don Pippin, who became the conductor. And then the following day, Alan Carr again. Auditions took place at Jerry Herman's house even on the 2nd of February, so you can see how close they were. Before we go any further talking about the song, I thought it would be useful to quickly summarize what the whole thing is about. So the characters' names in the musical are slightly changed from some of the source texts, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to stick with their names from the musical. So the show is about a couple called Georges and Alban, and they run a nightclub next door called La Cage aux Folles. And Alban is the lead performer, Zaza, who he appears in drag, and the Cagelles are the other performers. And they have raised Georges' biological son, Jean-Michel, as their son. The start of the story is when Jean-Michel comes home and announces that he's got engaged to a woman called Anne, who has parents called Edouard and Marie Dandon. Well, what's wrong with that, you might think? Well, Edouard Dandon is the Deputy General of the Tradition, Family and Morality Party, and therefore is not going to be very happy about Anne's choice of in-laws. And so the moral question of the whole thing is what's going to happen to Alban, especially when Georges and Jean-Michel tell him he's not invited to the wedding. And that leads us to the question of what turning La Cage into a musical is going to do for it. So looking again at the film in particular, which inspired Jerry Herman recently, I was struck by an element of the musical that's missing in the film, if you like. And so I started thinking about adaptation theory and this famous book by Linda Hutcheson called The Theory of Adaptation, which remains the key text on thinking about adaptations of all kinds. And she talks about how stories travel to different cultures and different media. So they start in one place and then they travel to another place. The American musicologist also quotes this interesting article in the New York Times from the novelist Zoe Heller, who was asked, what are we meant to get out of movies based on short stories and novels? And she answered, we're meant to get good movies. So we could ask in our turn, what are we supposed to get from musicals based on plays and films? And the answer is good musicals. And one of the ways in which they did this with La Cage was to increase the amount of time in which we see the drag queens performing. It takes up about a minute and a half at the beginning of the film and the odd occasional snippet. But basically, the film La Cage, the non-musical film, has almost no performance in the club. It's just there in the background. So this was going to be the key to the adaptation. The other aspect of the film that they tried to retain, though, for turning it into a musical, is that it's full of little comedy moments. It is a gentle French comedy. So I thought I'd play you a very short clip so you can get a flavor of what this film is like. This is the scene where Laurent, who is Jean-Michel in the musical, has told Georges that he's going to marry Anne, and then they kind of get over the shock, and then Jean-Michel rings Anne and says, "Oh, I've told him." And this is that particular snippet.
Il a sorti le champagne, on se préparait à fêter la nouvelle. Ah oui, j'ai mon verre dans la main, écoute. Notre amour, Andrea. Je vais te le passer. Papa? Papa?
Non. Non. Allô? Je bois à votre bonheur, Andrea. Merde. Non, excusez-moi, je viens simplement de casser mon verre. C'est pas grave, c'est du verre blanc, ça vous portera chance. Tiens.
And that's that. So the kind of the light tone of the musical, which is really about family, all derives from this. Now, Jerry Herman talked in many interviews about the inspiration for I Am What I Am being a piece of dialogue that he read in the first draft of Firestein's script. So Alban has just been told that he's not invited to the wedding. And in this early draft, Alban gives this speech, or at least this is the nearest I could find to an early version of it. And he responds to this terrible piece of news by saying, "I've spent the majority of my life fighting every rule in the book, battling every lesson I was taught, examining, analysing and reordering everything I was ever told just to find out who I am. I may not be anyone's idea of what someone would be, but I am me." So I reckon that this is the thing that made Herman say, "Can I steal some of these words and turn it into a song?" Which is very fun. It took me weeks and weeks to find this piece of dialogue, I have to say. The problem was that by the time Herman had written the song, it became very big and a performance. And so when Herman performed the song for Arthur Lawrence at the very beginning of the process and say, "Hey, I've written this song," Lawrence was thinking, well, it's not going to fit in the scene where it came from in the story because it's just three people backstage having a chat, and you can't sing this huge showstopper in that context. So Lawrence, in one of his books, talks about grappling with how to manage this situation, and the solution that he came up with was that the song must be sung in drag because we're in a drag club and we have to make the language of the musical work for this setting. And the other thing we need to do is to add an earlier version of the same music called We Are What We Are to open the show. And so this was the solution. What they did was to have, at the very beginning of the show, the Cagelle sing We Are What We Are, and it's a sort of slightly seedy number just about what fun they're having in the club. And then at the end of Act 1, to prime the showstopper, the Cagelle start reprising this number, and then Alban interrupts them and says, "Go away," and he performs his version of it, which is personal, and that's what the outpouring in the song derives from. So we're going to do it now.
I am what I am. I am my own special creation. So, come take a look. Give me the hook or the ovation. It's my world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say, "Hey world, I am what I am. I am what I am. I don't want praise, I don't want pity. I bang my own drum. Some think it's noise, I think it's pretty. And so what if I love each feather and each spangle? Why not try to see things from a different angle? Your life is a sham till you can shout out loud, "I am what I am. I am what I am, and what I am needs no excuses. I deal my own deck. Sometimes the ace, sometimes the deuces. There's one life, and there's no return and no deposit. One life, so it's time to open up your closet. Life's not worth a damn till you can say, hey world, I am what I am.
And in the original production, Alban removed his wig, threw it on the ground, and walked out through the theatre. So it really was a showstopper, and the only thing that could happen then was the interval, because there's too much of a stop, and you couldn't possibly carry on after that. It was known from the beginning of Herman's career that he couldn't read or write music. It was not a secret at all. So it's worth thinking about what the implications might be of trying to compose something where all you can do is play it on the piano and have someone else write it down. And what we find in a lot of his songs is that he starts with just a chord sequence like this. And then the other very pianistic writing is this stuff, a kind of vamp. It happens in an awful lot of his stuff, and Hello, Dolly is the same in both respects too. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because Beethoven is known to sort of start with a chord and then develop the whole thing in a kind of a bigger way and kind of plan the build. But nevertheless, there are limitations to what he could do musically. He does clearly have a very good ear, because this very unusual scale that we spent a lot of time rehearsing earlier, because it's very awkward to both play and sing. So he's clearly able to hear things like this in his head, but still there is a limitation to what he can do. But it does seem to me like his lyrics, there we go. It seems to me that his lyrics are what really makes these songs. He is a first-class lyricist. Now, as it happens, his papers were given to the Library of Congress a month ago, only last month. And what we discovered from this is that he only seems to have kept 7 pages of handwritten lyrics across his entire career. But funnily enough, 4 of the 7 pages are from La Cage aux Folles. So this is a song called Masculinity, and you can see there's some workings out here. But remarkably, one of the songs that we still have in his handwriting is I Am What I Am. So we can actually see something of the creation of this thing. And because he had this overnight inspiration, he literally went home and apparently came back the next day with the song written. You can kind of see that this is apparently the moment at which the thing was written down overnight. So if we zoom in a bit on this, we can see that because he created his words and music at the piano at the same time, he knows how many musical beats need to happen in a line, which is why there's some missing words and some stuff that he knows will go in there, but he hasn't worked out all the bits and pieces yet. And then it's a strophic song, which means we hear the same piece of music several times with new words. And so this is one of his later verses, I am what I am, I don't want praise, I don't want pity. And you can see on the left there, he's put a bracket and put yeah. So he's clearly very happy with that. But then as the song progresses to the end, he's sort of slightly either running out of ideas or hasn't quite finished it. So he's come up with spangle and different angle, but not the rest of it, apart from the very last bit, which goes, your life, a sham, till you can shout out loud, I am, squiggle. So what's interesting about this to me is that it's missing the key bit of the song. Now, the best way I could think of explaining where this might be coming from was to think of Italian opera. In Italian opera, the great 19th century composer Verdi had this phrase called la parola scenica, the theatrical word or the word of the scene. And what he meant was that you have to have one word or phrase that's going to summarize the entire situation very directly. And it got to the stage where Verdi got very dictatorial with his librettists who wrote the words and said, I need to know what the theatrical word is. And I don't know if I can explain what I mean, but I think I mean the word that most clearly and neatly brings the stage situation to life. And the most clear example of this that I can think of to explain it to you quickly is actually from Puccini, who wrote an aria called Nessun Dorma that you might be familiar with, famously sung by Pavarotti many times. And at the end of the song, the aria rather, it ends, and then he goes, vincerò, 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 which means I will win, I will win, I will win, which is the message of the aria. It doesn't make a lot of sense, other than we kind of know what he's talking about, but it's about emphasizing that as the idea of the scene.
All'alba vincerò, vincerò, vincerò.
So you see, I was only half joking when I sent you Pavarotti's biography the other day. Anyway, so you can see that there's this thing that in order to serve the kind of the scene, communicating one major point amidst all of these words and music is that we have one word or phrase. And in the case of I Am What I Am, it's clearly, well, we saw one earlier, I got lost, but look what I found. Remember, I talked about that. And in La Cage, it seems to me that there's one life, so it's time to open up your closet. This is the thing that stands out. And the intention of Herman to make this stand out is written into the score, because for just those two bars, he writes, or his arranger writes, majestically rallentando, which means slow it right down before moving into the last bit. So it is the biggest point in the song, and it's the thing that perhaps we take away amongst all of those words. But it took him until day 2, I guess, to come up with that phrase. More broadly, it seems to me that the words of this song lean, on the one hand, on words associated with gay culture, feathers, spangles, closet, pride. And then on the other hand, it's also a general song of pride and protest. And so things like bang my own drum, shout out loud, this is why the song came to be covered by people from other groups, women of color, the lesbian Argentine singer Sandra Mihanovic, the non-binary actor Jay Harrison G. And so you can see it's had this journey over the decades, and something about this combination of different kinds of words has kept it alive. We can see what happened when the show was in previews. It's the last days of rehearsal now. They're in Boston, a very conservative place, and they're ready to go, except they're not. And Lawrence writes in his diary, scenic disaster. And the outcome of the scenic disaster is that on Monday, the 13th of June, 1983, you can just see at the top there, it says, first Boston preview, cancelled. Scenic disaster continues. And then Tuesday, first preview, rescheduled, sensational hysteria. Wednesday, standing ovations at the end of both acts, which is very unusual to get us, even nowadays when people stand all the time at the end of musicals. It's quite unusual even now to get a standing ovation at the end of the first act. So we can see the impact of I Am What I Am right there. And just for 1 second, I wanted to consider a different song from the show, Look Over There, to demonstrate maybe why it's not had quite the same life as I Am What I Am. So in this song, Georges is now a bit irritated with Jean-Michel in the second act of the show, because Jean-Michel has gone, why hasn't Alban left? You know, all I've asked of him is to leave so I can get married. And Georges says, well, hang on a minute. What about everything that Alban has done for you since you were a child? But the odd thing about the music is that it's a waltz. And so this is a very strange musical gesture to use in a song about a father singing to his son. But what the waltz clearly represents is Georges' feelings for Alban. So the musical meaning is communicating something slightly different to the textual meaning. So we're going to do a very short snippet of this song. as we're coming to the end. But it is very pretty, and it's useful to think about a different number from the show. Here we go. Is this in a good place in your voice?
Pardon?
We haven't got this low problem with
We
it.
don't have the low notes anymore. We made it past them.
Okay.
How often is someone concerned with the tiniest thread of your life? Concerned with whatever you feel and whatever you touch. Look over there. Look over there. Somebody cares that much. How often does somebody sense that you need them without being told? When you have a hurt in your heart, you're too proud to disclose. Look over there. Look over there. Somebody always knows when your world spins too fast and your bubble has burst. Someone puts himself last so that you can come first. So count all the loves who will love you from now to the end of your life. And when you have added the loves who have loved you before, look over there. Look over there. Somebody loves you more.
There is one more context to talk about that's very personal in terms of the reception of the show. And in this documentary from about 20 years ago, we can hear Arthur Lawrence and Jerry Herman and George Hearn, who played Alban in the original production, talking about what that is and the impact it had on the show and on them personally.
AIDS started in the early 80s when Lacage did. And when the cast began dying off, that was when we really noticed it.
We lost, I guess, 3/4 of those guys, certainly half of them.
And slowly, we were told that so-and-so was ill and out of the show. And then the next time I came, they told me that he had passed away. And we were starting to lose our own people, our own beloved cast members. Right after Lacage opened, I met a man named Marty Finkelstein. And it was just instant attraction, and we got together. And about a year after we met, we discovered that Marty had come down with HIV. I had to live through seeing someone I love slip away. We didn't have the drugs then that we have today. And then to top it all off, to find out that I was HIV positive myself.
So this period became very important and significant for the reception of the show and very emotive, and yet it wasn't in any way planned, because the first time Herman had the idea to turn this into a musical is 1979. So it's a strange coincidence, but this became very important in terms of the legacy of the show and the legacy of that era. So bringing all of this together, we can see the journey of the song from a show tune to an anthem. It started out as specific to a dramatic situation. It's musically climactic. The words combine gay and activist language. And this led to the success of the stage musical. It turned it into a showstopper. And then with the context of the advent of AIDS with the original production, this led to cover versions with the wider LGBT community and other communities. And so the song has on the one hand represented something very specific in the show, something very specific around the time of the show, and then something very personal to lots of other people too. It really got away from the original creators in a way that they couldn't have predicted. To end, I wanted to perform another song from the LGBT Broadway Hollywood songbook, and it comes from a film made in 1939 called The Wizard of Oz. And thinking about representation and why that might mean something to this community, I was rereading recently L. Frank Baum's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and in the beginning of chapter 2 is while she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed coming towards her a group of the queerest people she had ever seen. So you can see we were there all the time. So here is Over the Rainbow.
When all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all around, heaven opens a magic lane. When all the clouds darken up the skyway, there's a rainbow highway to be found, leading from your window pane to a place behind the sun, just a step beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I've heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I? Thank you.